Dan from geekanoids.co.uk and their YouTube channel youtube.com/geekanoids, and today I'm doing a review of the iRig MIDI, and this is a device that enables you to plug a MIDI keyboard device into your iPad, and from there you can give the keyboard voices and go on to record it, or just make some noise out of the iPad itself. This is the box. And as it says quite clearly, I mean, it's a nice size. It says MIDI interface for iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad. And I should make that clear actually. Any iOS device this can be used for. I'm going to be demonstrating it today on an iPad. Around the side, not very much, just a few screenshots, although it is quite nice packaging. And this is from IK Multimedia. On the back, there's a little explanation of how it all works, but I'm sure it works pretty much the same as any other MIDI device. Probably should make it clear as well that it's not just keyboards that can be used, although that's what I'm using today. If you've got an electric drum kit or a kind of MIDI sequencer, then those can all be used too. Same thing around the side, not an awful lot going on the bottom. If you open up the box, I have opened this and been testing this for a while. There is just a white bit of cardboard, as well as these goodies inside. You get these cables, you get two, my apologies, of these MIDI cables. Now this is your standard MIDI connector, but normally this is just another MIDI cable on the other end. This is a lot like an audio mini jack, but this is what you use to go into the iRig MIDI itself, and I'll show you that in a second. This is a micro USB cable, micro USB to standard USB, used for charging up the device, as it does require a bit of extra power. And the iRig MIDI itself is this tiny bit of kit, as you can see there, and that plugs in to the iOS device with the standard 30-pin dock connector, and then on the bottom you have the in, through and out for the MIDI connections. Obviously that would be too big for the device itself, so that is why they've developed this sort of, it's not proprietary, but I don't know, I haven't seen this type of connector used on a MIDI device before. So what I'm going to do now is set up the iRig MIDI plugged into my iPad, just to give you a quick demonstration of the app Sample Tank, also developed by IK Multimedia. Now, if I turn my keyboard on, there is no sound coming out of this by itself. So any sound that's produced is going to be coming out of my jam box here, which is plugged into my iPad. So I'm just going to plug this in now. I have two apps which are related to the iRig MIDI. The first one is called iRig MIDI. Now this is a completely free app, and this is just used to record sample MIDI tracks. And you can see that that's just given me a quick indication there. And like I said, that's completely free and it's not very useful. It only works in portrait mode, which is annoying because this huge thing sticking out the bottom of your iPad means it doesn't work in portrait mode, and it doesn't give you any voices, so it really is a kind of basic application. However, Sample Tank is also made by IK Multimedia, and this is an application that has hundreds of voices for MIDI keyboards, sequencers and electric drum kits. So let's open this up. What I have here at the minute is the Pro version of the application, and I'm just going to give you a brief overview of some of the sounds that you get, because that is all I'm really interested in when I'm looking at an app like this. It retails for £13.99 on the App Store, that's £13.99 in the UK, and for that you get a certain selection of the voices. There is a free version, but you only really get, I think you get about 8, maybe 10 voices with it, so obviously not as full-featured as you'd like it to be. However, while we are talking about pricing, I will just point out that even though you've already bought the full version, supposedly, there are extra voices which come as a pack which you can get from the store in here. Now, I'll leave you to decide really whether that represents good value for money or not, since you do get a good range. However, if you actually want the full all sound packs, it's £27.99 on top of the £13.99 you've already spent on the app, so it's actually starting to look like something well over £100 when you factor in the device itself. Let's just give you a quick sample of some of the drum kits. they actually don't sound that bad for a MIDI device. Now, another thing about this is that it's obviously not plugged in to a MIDI drum kit. If it was, then you'd obviously be much easier to play with. So there we go, there are a couple of those. I'm going to brush over these. Let's pick one of the basses which is included. And I think this sounds kind of alright. Let's just pick one more briefly. And I think for a kind of basic bass sound, that's not too bad. And obviously there are some more synth sounds. Which you can play around with there. Guitar sounds are not awful. Although if you do play the right riff, you do end up with something that sounds a little bit RuneScapey. Again, because they are very basic sounds, there's nothing special here. I haven't been blown away by these voices. Maybe that's because they need to keep the file size down and sort of preferably under a gigabyte. Or maybe is that they have just cheapened out on these a bit. I'm hoping that it's the former. Now let's listen to the piano sound, because that can be a real test for something like this. Now thankfully, it offers something which is kind of alright. It's definitely not the best piano sound that I've heard. However, it's quite pleasing, and for the iPad, really not all that bad. If we just change that onto something a little bit different. Chorus piano, a sort of staple diet of any 70s ballad. Moving on to the electric piano sounds. I actually really like this stage electric piano sound that they've included here. I think it's quite a sort of hit the road jack type keyboard. Or this kind of bluesy jazz sound. Get some kind of crazy improvisation out the top of this. Although, and it seems to handle it just fine. I don't know if there's a limit to how many notes that have been played in at one time, but it does seem to do a really good job of transferring the data quickly, and you can actually see that quite nicely it comes up on the keyboard on screen. It also carries across the sort of sustain pedal information as well. So if I, play that, but if I put my pedal down here, you can hear that is being sustained, and that's really useful in something that you notice in a bad MIDI interfaces, when it doesn't carry across information like velocity as well, which is where I press that softly, and you get a big difference in sound. So you can play with, dynamic energy. So that's quite nice. Overall, I can really rate the iRig MIDI. I think it's a fantastic device for being able to really utilise the iPad for all it's worth, especially when paired with certain apps. However, I'm not a big fan of Sample Tank. I think for what it is, it's overpriced, especially considering that even once you bought the full version, there are still more voices to buy if you really want the works. The sounds themselves don't do a great job. I'm not over the moon with how these sound. Again, comparing this to GarageBand, which is a comparable app. I know that it's made by Apple, so obviously they don't have to charge the same as some of these independent developers, but it just does a better job. And the iRig MIDI isn't without competition either. The Apple Camera Connection Kit, you can plug via USB MIDI keyboards into that. Now I know that some older MIDI keyboards won't have that option, in which case this is what you want. But for half the price, if it does have a USB output, then I'm going to struggle not to recommend the iPad Camera Connection Kit, oddly enough, because it does open up some more features, especially when you're thinking that this retails for around $49.99 and the Apple for around half that, around the £25 mark. So this has been Dan doing my review of Sample Tank and the iRig MIDI for geekanoids.co.uk.